I'd like to call the work study session to order, being held here at the Jerry Rovey District Facility. Governing board members present: Michael Todd, Brian Parks. Paul Bixler is joining us via telephone, and myself. Mr. Jensen is en route on a plane, I believe, and will try and join us if he can. With that being said, Mr. Todd, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And with that, we'll just get right into it. Dr. Schuff.
President Aguirre, members of the board, tonight's session really is to surface additional questions that you may have or opportunities just to discuss any variation to the model as proposed. Some of the information that was requested or discussed this last governing board meeting I've embedded into the slide deck, but I wasn't planning to go through the whole slide deck just because we've been through that a couple of times now with public hearings with additional information. So if you want to pose your questions, or if you want me to point us just to the new information, just tell me how you would like for us to proceed this afternoon.
Mr. Todd?
I do have some questions that I want answered. I don't know that we need to go over the PowerPoint again, but I do have a few questions when we get to that point.
Parks?
However you want to bring it forward.
Well, and when your topics come up, I can direct you to certain slides for some backup information, or we can just engage in a conversation with the folks around the table.
So for me, I was just wondering if we could just look at the stuff that we haven't looked at already.
Okay.
I think we've had 3 different opportunities to look at those slides, but I think there was some new questions that were raised, and if we could just focus in on those,
I'd be happy to
that
do
might
that.
help us. And then if there's any additional questions at that point.
Mr. President. President Aguirre.
Yes, Ms. Bixler.
I also agree with you. We have seen the previous stuff quite a bit, so I would be interested, though, in hearing what we have that's new information.
And I apologize, Ms. Bixler. It's only been a minute, and I already forgot you were on the phone, so my apologies. I do apologize, Ms. Bixler.
I am not offended.
Dr. Schuff, please.
Sure, I'm just waiting for the handy clicker to advance forward. If you have it in PDF, I'm happy to go to there and slide it forward if that's helpful. Let me see if I can help the conversation move along. I think one of the first questions that came up was related to special education. An important consideration of how will we be able to meet the needs of our children who have instructional educational plans, individual educational plans, and the minutes that are within those plans, and what is the implication when we have less instructional hours in the school year. So some of the models we've looked at for instructional models, that certainly depends on how long we set the school day. I think we've been having conversations around 7 hours and 30 minutes. And then 4 days, and then what that calendar would be if it was approximately 148 days. We're somewhere between 30 and 36 hours in the school year less. So that's 30 to 36 hours. We have less time with access for children to get their those minutes. And the question really centers around staffing. So right now, we do have some shortfalls. We are behind in some of the instructional minutes for some of our special education students. And it's not a matter of schedule, it's more a matter of where we don't have the staff hired in place providing services. So there just aren't enough people to divide out those hours. And we may be in a position, if we're not able to make up those hours, we may be in a position where we have to do compensatory services, say in the summer, to make up for those hours. So the unknown is, if we are fully staffed and we staff for the growth that's needed for next year and we're fully staffed, our belief is that we would be able to deliver and make good on all of the hours that are in their IEPs. But regardless of whether it's 5-day or 4-day, if we are not fully staffed, we will have issues with that, and our children will not be getting all that they need. So I think our recommendation at this point, it's not a matter of 5-day versus 4-day, but if we can't get the more staff we need to fill the spots we have and for the growth, it will give more of a pinch being on the 4-day than the 5-day. Does that make sense? It's really about staffing concerns.
So with the IEPs, and if going to a 4, and if what you're talking about that there is a shortfall, is there possibly an option to look at a 5-day for that? Is that a solution, is what I'm asking?
Yeah. So on the surface, maybe. Here's the issue. When they come to school, if they come to school on 5 days, now for some children or some classes, now we don't have lunch services. Okay. Now we're bringing in transportation services. A principal now is having to come back to the campus. So when you start to pull all those things back, you've undermined what you achieved with a 4-day.
But it would just be for a very small select group, correct? Of that, maybe, I'm just kind of spitballing here a little bit, right? Of that, if we had those group of students, that could they all meet centrally at one school?
Are you suggesting it for all self-contained special ed, or maybe some that have, say, very high needs?
Yes.
That would be difficult for families being home. Ms. Kay, do you want to? Emmerich?
There we go. Looking at self-contained, they're in those classrooms, so they won't miss any of their minutes. But yes and no. You would still have to have all the assistants, and you would have a lot of staff on the campus. I think what we were looking at too is the resource students. So yeah, we do have some high number of minutes of those resource students. Could that occur? Yes, but that could be a lot of students depending. So if there are high A's, B's, then you may be, at least having 3 or 4 or 5 kids at each campus. So, which would bring them all on one campus. It really just depends. And it also depends on staffing. So we have schools that are fully staffed. They have no missed minutes because they're fully staffed. But those schools that are not fully staffed, that's where we run into the issues with the bigger campuses, and the amount of students. We're growing so quickly. We're at 670. That was our October 1 count. So.
I would also add, in order to provide the service minutes, we would need a special education teacher to be with them. So we would have to determine if we were going to a 5-day only for special education students. Do we have a teacher who's on a 5-day schedule? And then all of the other teachers are on a 4-day schedule? Is that teacher paid differently? I mean, I think those are a lot of different things just to think about.
The other aspect with special education, the least restrictive environment, many of our children in special education, they also push in to the regular classroom. So then on that Friday, there's no regular classroom for them to be interacting with their peers during that time. So if you narrowed it down to, okay, give an example of, maybe our children with the highest physical needs. And so maybe that is just a few classrooms, and I think maybe that's your example, because the resource kids, they've been regular, and some of the self-contained, that would work for the 4-day. But maybe a child that has feeding tubes or wheelchair bound, maybe some of those
And
students.
those are the students that I'm particularly concerned about, of that
And those
they
are,
deserve the most that we can give.
and those are the students that we do give ESY to. Almost all of those students come in for 4 weeks of ESY, extended school year. So that means, do we extend the extended school year for another week? There's ways to look at it differently, but they do come in. And a lot of them opt not to. The other things we need to look at is the attendance of those students. A lot of those kids miss schools on Mondays and Fridays and sometimes Wednesdays because of the medical issues.
Okay.
So we're going to have to look at that. If we did do something on Friday, would they even come? Because a lot of them do have medical issues.
So then an option, if we see that there is a need, one option is to extend their year, possibly another 4 days. That could be an option.
Yeah, that could very well be an option.
Okay.
Because they get extended school year, so in June, when the summer school programs are going on, so is ESY. And could we extend that for another week? Absolutely.
And so that their medical needs could be met throughout the weeks of,
They're educational, medical, functional. Absolutely.
okay, thank you very much.
Any
Dr.
other
Seth?
questions? Yes.
Dr. Seth, I got a quick question. If you could clarify for me, when we talk about the instructional minutes, they have to be delivered by instructors who are and not highly qualified, but are qualified to the point where those minutes count. Am I correct in my understanding that if the instructional minutes are not delivered by a person who is, say, a certified special ed teacher, that those minutes don't count?
Absolutely. If it's a general ed teacher, they cannot give special education minutes. It has to be somebody that has a special ed certification. Now, in saying that, if there is an assistant working with a teacher in a classroom, they can also give minutes. So that's something that, we may want to look at some point, because that allows that teacher to give minutes in that room, and with the guidance, they can actually work with that paraprofessional. But you're absolutely right. The only teacher that can give it would be the special ed teacher.
And right now, do we have some special ed teachers on emergency certification?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And some
Thank
of them
you.
are in training. They're actually in training. Once they finish their training program, they'll be fully certified for special education. But yes, we have a couple of those.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on special ed, board members?
Did you say we have 670 students? That's right, 670, okay.
Yes, we have 670 students. Last year at this time, we had something like, I want to say 538, something like that.
All right, another area for consideration, and this is, it would be helpful to have the board provide further direction on this, if this is the direction we go with the 4-day week, is what we would be doing with the instructional minutes. So just as a review, the 5-day schedule, 7 hours per day, this is what we currently have right now, with 1,134 hours per school year. And so we've shown a couple of examples, and I've narrowed it down based on some of the conversations you've had in other meetings. My interpretation is that you're liking the 148 days, 7 hours and 30 minutes. I think I've left at least one slide with a variation just in case we wanted to look at something else. Mr. Moreno is on standby. If you come up with a creative solution, you want to actually model it slightly different in some way, he's got the Excel just ready to fly at his fingertips. This is an example. So you can see this is in 1,100, so 34 hours less. And at some points we were trying to maximize the total number of instructional hours and trying to really, shave off any early releases at all. We know parents don't prefer them. And then we thought truly about the impact back for our teachers, for example, at parent-teacher conferences. Right now, they have early release on Wednesday. They might be doing some of those. Technically, Thursday and Friday early releases are for parent-teacher conferences. So in this model, we looked at adding 1 day as an early release for for parent-teacher conferences in the fall and 1 day in the spring. But also they have the full Friday and calling that a work day. Not one of their flexible Fridays. They would have a full day for a parent-teacher conferences. So this was modeled, one in the fall, one in the spring, but also getting a Friday off with it. And then just recognizing that families and staff do like to be able to get away, on the day before the holidays and the day before summer break. Those weren't modeled in there before. So I just wanted you to see what the impact of that was. And this a slight change to the early release day. Instead of 2 hours and 40 minutes, just a flat 2.5 hours, thinking that everybody can do the mental calculations of time in their head a little easier and not needing to have it be quite so early. But again, we could model that much differently. We could model it as go to school for 3 hours and then be released the rest of the time. So that's where I'm talking about the flexibility that, the board has further input on that. So that one shows you, so we had 1104 and 1100 here, but compared to the other one, we've got, did I do that right? So 1134, there we go. That's where it's coming out. So 34 hours less. One other option, if you were, if your goal is to try to get it as close to zero of a difference as possible, this is a way of getting closer to that zero difference. And this is modeled at 7 hours and 40 minutes per day. So that's 40 minutes longer school day instead of the 30-minute longer school day. And that still leaves this one, as an example, only has 1 day for fall conferences, 1 day for spring conferences that are early release. They still have both Fridays, nothing for the start of school or end of school. So you can see and feel the variations there of what that would look like. Talking to other school districts, they've got a 150 school day. I looked at the calendar, and there's really not an easy way to add 2 more days back in without going an extended week beyond what our start and finish calendar dates are right now and how we are, for the most part, matching up with Buckeye Union High School District. But if that's the board interest to get us back to, a closer zero balance of the instruction hours and not harming instruction from that perspective, there are ways to do it. So I'm going to stop talking there for a minute and just, we just would like your input around that if you're interested in pursuing this more.
Question.
Dr. Sutton, I have a quick question. Did we not look at a model that had a 140-day instructional calendar with 7.5 hour school day?
So here's the 148 days with 7.5 hours per school day for the 4 days. So this is an example of that. I have, I could pull up from a different slide deck, I could pull it up where it would have a few more hours added back. So you can imagine, these are the reason why I made this 2.5, so we could do the math on the fly here. If we were to eliminate the day before winter break and the last day of school, that gives you 5 hours back. So now we're back to, probably 29 hours less. So we can add or take away based on your interest.
I think what Ms. Bixler was asking was, did we have a model where it was 140 days?
We did not.
Did you hear that, Paul?
Yes, President Wire, I did hear that.
Okay.
To be honest, the question I asked was answered by Dr. Sepp. It was 148 that
Okay.
I recall. It seemed to me that that was the model with a 4-day week that had the best chance of recapturing some of the lost minutes, or lost hours by going to a 4-day schedule.
That one, to capture the most, you'd be looking at a slightly longer school day at 7 hours and 40 minutes. That one gets you much closer to the same amount.
Was that a 148-day instructional schedule, or was that 147?
The two we're looking at now are for 148 days, and I think that's probably what we're recommending as well. It has a 1-day difference than the Buckeye Union School District. It's, instead of starting school on Tuesday, it starts school on Monday. They have a full Monday through Thursday school week. So it seemed to have the least impact. Thought behind a variation. If we had released earlier than Buckeye Union, then if we were dealing with childcare, by going 1 day sooner than the high school students, we're taking care of the children, so we're thinking that probably is not going to be an issue for vacations or anything else, and that's probably the best opportunity to pick up some hours.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Brian?
Answered my question, actually.
Okay. Michael?
I have a couple questions, and they might lead to help me clarify other questions, or they may solve them. When we talk about the IEP numbers, we're required in the state to give 712 to 890 hours to a, I don't want to say normal student, but a student that does not require IEP. Are the minutes of the IEP based, how do we come up with those minutes? So I guess where I'm getting at, we're offering 1,129 minutes. Are we required to give more IEP minutes than if we were offering the state minimum of 712 minutes for a first grader?
Good question.
Those minutes are embedded. So we don't go over the school hours as like more than a general ed students. It's embedded within there. So some of the minutes will be push-in minutes so that they can be with their typical peers. And that's when the special ed teacher goes in there and works with the student in that environment. And then the pull-out minutes, they'll bring the students out and work on individual skills. And how they're based, it's that team. That IEP team gets together, and when they start talking about the needs of the child, maybe the child needs this amount of minutes in reading comprehension. So the team talks about it, and they make that decision. It isn't a decision that I make or anybody else makes it, but that team.
Okay, so I appreciate that, but my question is, if we had a student, and I'll ask her in a minute to kind of give us some samples, but if we were doing the state minimum of 712 hours,
Okay.
we may have a student that we say, you need 120 minutes a week of IEP minutes. And maybe that's split up in 2 categories, 6 categories, however that is. That would be much harder for us to accomplish if we were only doing the 712 minutes than if we were doing 1,129 minutes. So if we were only doing 712, would we suggest that that student now only gets 60 minutes of IEP time instead of 120?
I would say that would not be good practice to do
No,
that.
I understand, but I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, and if we're reducing them all, are the number of minutes that we reduce right now, 30 hours a year, if we did reduce those, and I'm just asking questions. I don't want anybody to read in this too far. I'm trying to come up with where everything is.
Trying to figure this
Would we just reduce those minutes down a little bit as well? So as a whole, the whole body would lose 30 hours, and so there would just be a few less IEP minutes offered in a 4-day work.
No, I don't think we would recommend that at all.
Can I clarify, Mr. Todd? Are you asking, could we amend the IEP minutes based on the schedule that we choose?
Well, yeah, I would ask
Really,
that
no.
If we had an IEP team meeting, we could amend the minutes.
But we wouldn't want to amend the minutes due to our schedules. It's what the child needs.
Okay, that's
So-
what I was
And
clarifying.
currently, right now, we don't have like if the student had that many IEP minutes, they would be in a C placement, a self-contained, and they don't have minutes for every single minute of the day.
So, and maybe that's what I should have asked my other question first, is can you give us some examples of what are kind of the minimum, maximum? Tell us 3 students, kind of the number 1, number 5, and number 10, if you will,
Okay.
of what their minutes might be like.
So
Some of the least amount of minutes versus the max, and how that's spread out over the
correct.
course of a week or
So
a day.
we usually do monthly minutes because the monthly minutes means that if a teacher is out, because they have to make up those minutes. If the student's out, we don't make those minutes up. But if a teacher is, so a student with an A census, we call it an A census, and they're in general education most of the time. They may have maybe 120 minutes a month, or it could be, 240 minutes a month. And then our heavy hitting kids may have 1,000 minutes a month. I don't think we right now have in a resource setting anything more than 2,000 minutes a month, because that's really hard. Once it gets to that point, then we think if that child needs that much specialized instruction, then they may need to be in a setting that is all specialized.
Thank you.
Hope that helps.
No, it does. Appreciate it. I had no idea how many minutes. So if I was doing 120 a day, I was off. Thank you.
So, Brian, thoughts on the schedule?
Not too much. I did kind of a quick question. I'd heard here on the IEPs going a week longer. Our cutoff is right before Memorial Day weekend, right?
I can actually.
Or is it the week before? Because, maybe that's how we make up some of this. It's just a thought that was in my head as we were sitting here talking about it.
It's typically the 17th, 18th, 19th,
Right.
20th, whatever, the week before that. In either case, whatever your end of your calendar is, it goes into extended school year. Whether you choose to make that the following week, or whether you choose to make that into June, or whether you choose to make that into June and July, that's all considered extended school year. So it would be along the same concept of the ESY.
Okay. All right. That was the only question I had. I know where I'm leaning based on all of the information that's coming in. So, and I unfortunately had a child in an IEP for 10 years, so I know it inside and out. So it's a challenge, and I'm a little alarmed at the numbers, quite frankly. But
If the, coming back to the instructional minutes or the instructional hours within the school year, first off, are you comfortable with 148 days in the year? Are you looking for more or less? Or are we spot on with 148?
Michael?
I mean, I think 148 is fine. My concern at some point is we're going a lot more hours than I feel like I went when I was a student. When I was young, I have a little bit of a memory of when I was in this grade level. So do we continue to look at this, or do we look more at a year-round model where students get breaks throughout the year? Because, man, it just seems like, I remember as a parent when my daughter was younger, she's in college now, but it felt like we barely got our summer going, and it was time to come back, and the kids never got a break. There's obviously concerns if you look to the year-round as well, if you've got peaks and valleys, but are those peaks and valleys more stable, not as long and tall? I don't know, but I think the 4-day, my other thought with this is with the 4-day, we talk right now about IEPs. We're not meeting minutes because we're short on staff. We're looking at retention and recruitment with the 4-day week. So it almost seems to me like this 4-day week is our best chance to recruit more teachers to get the minutes in place. Because what we're doing now, we've heard loud and clear, is not exactly working. And we want to make sure every student gets their full potential of education, the IEP students as well. But when we have emergency substitutes, and bless their hearts, they're huge. I mean, every teacher is important to us, but those people who are stepping into these roles right now are really going above and beyond, and probably jumping into alligator pits that they never dreamed that they would be. So I think the 4-day week works, and it brings some recruitment and retention, which helps. I don't want to do it as an experiment and find out it failed miserably and then be back to a 5-day week in a year. This is a big pendulum swing. But I do feel like the 4-day, we've looked at this, and from a cost standpoint, doing a 4-day to save money would get this district to a point that would if we get to that point, we do. But I don't think we're there. We're looking at this for teacher retention and recruitment, which is going to help us provide a better education to all of our students, including the IEP students. So that's kind of, you've done this a lot longer than me, obviously by the questions I'm asking, but and you as well as recruitment and retention. So does that seem off base, or does that seem like we can pull more people in, more good teachers and staff?
I think that is the number one reason I hear the governing board considering it, and the indications from other school districts who have done it is at least initially they saw the increase from that. And beyond that, it's projecting the future and what happens with the pipeline of teachers and et cetera. So as we start to model a consideration for this and what, if the board is supportive of doing it, when we come back, I want to be able to bring back, a model that you this is starting to look and sound like, shaping up like what you're interested in doing. So, we look at 148 days, and then really the big distinction, the next distinction is 7 hours and 30 minutes, 7 hours and 40 minutes. I did hear from the committee concerns about just the ability to kind of hang in there all day long, particularly for our youngest students, and sometimes even for our teachers. And the last public hearing, we had a middle school teacher said, and I'm a little worried about me, hanging in there for the full day with middle school students. So, so I think that's the consideration there is, and I don't know, does 10 minutes make a big difference one way or the other? I don't know. I really couldn't say. But 7 hours and 40 minutes gets you closer to those people who highly value, let's not take away instructional hours for our children. Let's do what we can to make sure we don't impact them academically. And 7 hours and 30 minutes gets more to the people who are thinking about, is this doable? Can we get the stamina to do this for a longer school day?
You asked about the first question is 148 if that's what we want. Question, say that I'm okay with that. I guess that's where we need to go first. Is that a consensus, and then we can move on to the second question.
So I heard Ms. Bixler agree with 148. I hear Mr. Parks agree with 148. I'm okay with 148. So,
President Wire, quick question. I know that we had talked previously about the impact of a 4-day week on our hourly paid employees. Dr. Stuff, we were going to look into some ways to mitigate that, as to lessen that impact as much as possible. Have we found a good way to do that, or is that still going to be one of the outcomes?
We're going to talk a little bit more about that as the next, I don't know if it's the next topic because I'm not actually remembering what's coming next in the slides, but we will talk for sure about that to get those questions answered for you. If we could focus on, I think I heard 148 is okay. Are you liking 7 hours and 30 minutes, 7 hours and 40 minutes, 7 hours and 45 minutes? What are you liking?
so for me, I like the 740 to get as close to uninterrupted as we are right now when it comes to hours. And if we can get that as close to what we are right now as possible, then that's what I think that we need to do.
Okay, others?
I can go either way, this 30 or 40, but my concern is sometimes we're looking at just hours instead of what we're getting out of that time. I guess I'd like a little feedback maybe from teachers and admin as far as, are those quality 10 minutes? I mean, it sounds stupid, but coming down to 10 minutes, but are they even there?
That's a great question.
So, because you just holding them for an extra 10 minutes may not make sense.
Okay. Holly, do you want to see how would you respond?
I'm sorry, Dr. Stuff, who are you asking?
Holly Weiner, principal at Liberty Elementary School.
So I don't think we really know because we don't have school for 7 hours and 30 or 7 hours and 40 minutes. I do think sometimes I feel like throughout the day between lunches and recess and specials, the day can be quite choppy. And so I do think sometimes thinking about the 7 hours and 30 minutes or the 7 hours and 40 minutes may allow us some different flexibility for longer math or ELA blocks, for some deeper learning opportunities. So I don't know that I think if you engage the students in the right way and you plan accordingly, you can make it valuable 7 hours and 30 or 7 hours and 40 minutes.
Could you add on what you think about young children? And then Mrs. Boris or Erica, you've taught young children.
Snack time.
I think we may need to talk about an additional recess at some point in the day, or some TPR and total physical response learning in the classroom, but just ways to get them out of their seat and get the wiggles out.
Right. TPR, is that what they call it? Used to be called snack time.
No, this is jump up and dance to the music a little bit while you're saying your ABCs.
Okay. Good stuff, for sure.
So I'm going to
Yeah,
answer because I
Sarah
taught,
Schaefer here.
sorry, I taught kindergarten for, it was like an 8-hour day, for like a year or two. And it is hard at first. It is definitely a long day. You are definitely, at least for myself, I can only speak to myself, you are very tired having 5-year-olds at the end of that long of a day. But having a recess, the last hour or so really helps them. And I just had to learn how to structure my day best for my students to make every minute possible. But I will say when I then moved to Liberty back to a shorter day, I was like, wow, I have so much energy at the end of the day. So it is a learning curve. It is hard on them. But, by the end of the year, they didn't know any different either.
Everyone adjusts.
Everyone adjusts.
I'm saying.
Yes.
We all adapt.
Yeah, and we also had 5 days. So, 5 days of that is a really long day.
Gotcha. No, that's good info right there when you say that was 5 days. Yep.
Thank you.
Miss Daniel or Boris, do you have anything else you'd want to add?
I would just piggyback on what she said about structuring your day, because we made a shift this year of making sure our kinders were like heavy academic in the morning, and the champs wasn't until the afternoon to give them that break, because their stamina is much less than ours. And then we flipped it so the older kids have theirs in the morning, so that they wakes them up and gets them going. So I just think it's how you structure your day. But also kinder wouldn't really know any different, right? Because they'd be coming in at this. So I think it would be okay.
And and I'll tell you that I think you bring up a really valid point right there when you said that, is that the kinder kids, and I don't know that this has been brought up in any of our meetings now that you say that, is the kinder, they won't know any better. And as our kinders progress through, this is just the way school is. So that's okay, for sure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And kindergarten teachers are experts at planning very engaging hands-on lessons and keeping the pace moving and switching from a subject seamlessly to another subject as well.
Right.
I'm going to advocate for something here. 10 minutes can be placed very strategically in a schedule. And right now, our champs teachers only have 35 minutes to teach champs. We could think about using some of those minutes to extend the learning of creativity, mobility, critical thinking outside of the classroom in our champs areas, which then also extends our teachers' prep time for a longer day.
Okay.
So I just want to put it out there that we can manipulate those minutes to help with a lot of things.
Okay. I
So
don't think anyone's looked at that.
Well,
Has
I
even
was
thought about something like that.
well, I
'Cause
was actually thinking, where my thought process was, and the reason I asked was, sometimes if it's done correctly, more time gives you more flexibility to do the things you want to do, as opposed to bringing it down. But I had to kind of get the input because, that's kind of been my experience. So You know, if we could put in just getting kids out doing something else for 10 minutes, that 10 minutes it's a positive thing for the kids. So, yeah, I'm okay with the 740 then.
So here you can see up on the schedule, we modeled out if the override passes and we aren't having to cut these positions, we have the ability to, right now we're at 35 minutes. So we went to an 11 period day from a financial reason, not because we thought it was the best thing for kids and learning and for our teachers to reduce prep time. It was a financial decision. So with the override, coming back, if that is positive, then we are looking at, we would be recommending moving back to a 10 period day, which means also our special area teachers are they're teaching 8 classes a day instead of 9 classes a day, the swirl of kids coming through. And if it became a 7 hour and 40 minute, that is kind of the 7.6 hour, it's really essentially about a difference of 1 minute between, how long those prep periods would be. But we last year, before we moved to this, we were at a 40-minute prep for our teachers. They reduced down to about 30 during COVID times because of the transfer of kids and cleaning the rooms in between, so 30 to 35 minutes. Well, this schedule would bring us to a 45 or 46-minute period for our children. And it's still buffered a little bit by transition time, so it's not quite 45, 46 in reality. You're going to have some passing time in there. But that is also a benefit for our teachers for more extended time for what they do during the school day and, when they meet with one another or do things. It's also as beneficial, as Mrs. Camp said, for children learning those actual programs and skills and practicing for presentations, etc. It's a meaningful time.
Ms. Bixler, can you see the presentation?
I cannot, but I'm able to follow the math.
Okay. So
Thank you for asking me. For me, the 148 with the 40-minute, that would be the direction I'd like to go.
So can you go back?
Right where I was?
Yep, right there. So
We're on slide 18 if you happen to be following along.
just looking at this, that we know that our ELA, that we do need to get better. And the only way to get better sometimes at things is to spend more time on things. And I see that the ELA's increased and the math has increased also. But then, of course, with the break that you guys talked about of that 10 minutes of whatever that may look like of as a flex time, however it works out for, the particular teachers.
Kindergarten through 5th grade, they exercise a lot of flexibility
Yeah.
because they're not having to switch and meet up with a different teacher at a
Right.
different time. So we only modeled it at the middle school to give an example. It's not that a primary classroom couldn't use the same number of minutes, but they exercise more flexibility.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to keep moving along the things to think about. So this one is 7 hours and 40 minutes. What I didn't model here that you can see is this is modeled with just 2 early releases. This came from our conversation before, so they're actually modeled at 2 hours and 40 minutes versus 2 hours and 30 minutes, and really that's neither here nor there. But I'm interested in knowing, let's even go back to this idea here of 1 parent-teacher conference, a Thursday off, or part release early on a Thursday in the fall, 1 in the spring for parent-teacher conferences. Do you like adding the day before winter break and the last day of school? And that's approximately 5 to 6 hours of time over the course of the year. If you don't do that, yes, you do get closer. Like I said, you come at 5 hours. It would be about 10 hours less time if you did an early release at the start of before winter break and before summer. So this is just again another option.
So I'm all for early outs before the holidays. Believe me, I love it. I wonder, is there any value in that though, or is the value in the early release days for parent-teacher conferences? Am I understanding that correctly?
It really, we think no matter what, we should have an early release in the fall and the spring for parent-teacher conferences. I think the question that is add-on is, we were reluctant to put them in at first, any of them, because we felt like we were doing this trade with parents. We're taking off the Friday and we're not going to do this early release thing to you, which we know can be hard on parents.
Okay.
So we were trying to be a little lean with them, and then coming back thinking, all right, now what's the reality of teaching, and what's the reality of having to do parent-teacher conferences, and what our teachers have to be flexible to be able to meet with parents. We thought we should add one day back in the fall and the spring for parent-teacher conferences, and then there's a consideration of, that meaningful, usable time with kids the last day before of each of those times. We could go either way on that, and just wanted to let the board weigh in on that.
Yeah, for me, and I just want to make sure I understood it correctly. I think there's more value in just two half days utilized for parent-teacher conferences.
Mr. Aguirre, if I can just add real quick, some of the rationale for the early release the day before a break is twofold. Number one is typically our student attendance is a little bit lower. Many parents and families try and get an early break, even if we had a full day. So that's one kind of trend that we've noticed in terms of that. But the other component is that teachers typically are wrapping up some certain things at those time frames, and it allows them some focused time to be able to do that without particular students there. In other words, the last day of school on the 19th this year, if dismissal is at 2:30 or 3:30, depending upon the school, teachers have a checkout process that they finish, as an example, that one day a year to get everything buttoned up. That is their last contractual day. And so that additional half day allows them to do that, plus secure all of their grading and things of that sort. So there's two rationales to that. It could go either way, but you just asked the question about why. So that should provide some insight there for you.
And if we had those two additional early release days, what would that do as far as days wise to the school year? Would that add just one day?
No days, because the children still come to school for 148 days. 2 of those would be early release, and so we just would accumulate a few less hours on those days. So what you're seeing right here on the screen, I think you would take away an additional 5 hours if the early releases were 2 hours and 30 minutes, and it'd be 5 hours and 40 minutes difference if we added 2 more partial days. If two of the 148 days were also partial. We've already calculated this with, out of the 148, 2 of those in this model on slide 15 takes 2 of those days at early release, and the consideration is whether you'd want to add 2 more and make it 4 days at early release of the 148 days.
And that's what I'm asking. If we added 2 more days, would that be 10 hours less, or would that be?
Yes, it'd be about 10 hours less.
Okay.
Instead of 5 hours less, it'd be about 10 hours less.
Yeah, I can only speak for myself. I'd be more interested in just 2 early release days.
Okay.
Mr. Parks, thoughts? Come back to you. You're mulling it over.
Yeah.
Mr. Todd?
Kind of doing the same thing. I'm mulling it over a little bit.
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, I'm more with you on this one, Mark. I really believe that the 148 day with the 740 with only the 2 release days, that to me is the direction I'm looking.
So I tell you what I was mulling over. I was mulling over the fact that we're giving Fridays off anyway.
And that's what my thinking was.
And it kind of gets a little redundant. Honestly, my concern, and what I was doing is adding it up in my head, is doing the parent-teacher conference, I guess a day and a half would be enough to get that completed. That would have been my only concern with the 2 days. So I'm okay with the 2 day.
Mr. Todd?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Then what you see here on slide 15 is when we bring it back for your consideration for approval, this is what we'll bring back, is what we're looking at right here. All right, thank you. All right, I should just flip forward. So my apologies. All right, so what we wanted to show here is, and you can't see it unless it's on your screen and you blow it up a little bit, the actual calendar, and then so the impact of that with 148 days. We modeled it with red and blue that are simply which Fridays are off completely for teachers. So that would be essentially non-contracted time, for them. And yes, when you add up all the hours that they would be actually working, it is less than a 40-hour week, but we are recognizing that they typically work way more than a 40-hour week, and this is as a professionalism on their part. They're just going to do what they need to do to get their work done, much like they do now. But now with this model, with 17 Fridays off that they didn't have before, that would give them 17 more days to choose to work or choose not to work. Those are non-contracted days. And the others would be days for would be considered work days on the others, and those would include things like the Friday conferences. It would include some of the time that they meet as collaborative teams. Some of that time may be given over to them to still make choices individually. If there's district professional development, if there are site activities that they're doing collaboratively or for learning for new teachers and such, those would be on the alternate days. So it's difficult to see here, but that's how that is modeled. And so the only thing that's new on this one is that changing the red blue, what was considered a work day, which took that conference day and push that to a contracted work day, because we know we expect them to be doing conferences. It doesn't mean that if they're finished with their conferences, if teachers start their conferences on Monday or even the Friday before all this, they're pretty good about trying to spread those out. It helps them and it helps their parents. The intent is, even though we're calling that a work day, when they finish doing their conferences, if they finish at 10 o'clock in the morning, they're finished for the day. So, that's still a professional decision on their part of how they use that time.
That is professional development. Is that part of those days then?
So the red days, the work days, that's where professional learning could take place. That's where their collaborative planning time as teams could take place. That is where maybe some of the community building as a school, that they do some things just for school culture and community. Those take place during that time. So the work days are just the work days, and then the off days are just the off days.
I'm glad you brought that up, of that maybe some of those days are things that are happening within the community that they don't necessarily always get to go to, that maybe they would like to attend also, so I appreciate that. That's a hint, by the way, out there, TV land.
Dr. Seth?
Yes, Ms. Bixler.
When we talk about the 7-hour, 40-minute day, would that create a longer conference time for our or a planning time for within the structure of the day for our teachers?
Yes, it would. It's simply a difference of 1 minute between the 7-hour 30 versus the 7-hour 40. But it is right now. Remember that they have a 35-minute schedule for specials. That's actually shaved off probably a minute or two for transition, and this would push that to 45 or 46 minutes as long as the override passes.
We'll know tonight.
Okay, I'll stop saying that. I'm speaking it into the universe, prayers and all.
I have a question with regards to professional development. We came up with multiple plans for classrooms. What we really didn't seem to do is come up with multiple plans for professional development. So I would like to see us have 3 or 4 ideas. I feel like we're kind of boxed in that we're thinking we've got this many hours and we've got to put teachers to a 40-hour work week. We all know the teachers are working outside that 40 hours. Excuse me. So do we need to do a full 40 hours here? Can we reduce this down to where they have one Friday a month that they come in? And then secondly, I think we should really clarify what that roadmap of professional development is like. I don't think every teacher needs to sit through every professional development, because a science teacher probably really doesn't need to spend as much time on English, perhaps, or whatever the topic is. But also, looking at this, I want to make sure, as we have it now, there's some time for community time. But who's going to define that? And do we get one school, and again, this isn't today, but this is down the road, where one person decides, nope, we're not doing community time, we're going to be in here grinding away on professional development, where another school maybe decides we're going to do all community time. So I'd really like to see a roadmap of what's expected, kind of a continuing education program. In the paramedic world, they say you need so many hours of pediatric care, you need so much time in burn care, you need so much time here, and then you get some free time as well to go out and specialize in something that's very interesting to you, specific traumas, maybe it's pediatrics, different things. The culmination behind that now is everybody gets out to do their special, and then that comes back, and now when you have a crew of 3 or 4, which I look at a classroom, 3 or 4 teachers neighboring, kind of working together, they've all got a specialty, they've all got something that they're a little more interested in, it pulls back. But I want to define this, and I don't want to get this professional development. To me, this becomes a slippery slope that right now we say, well, you're going to come in for 6 hours. And oh, gee golly, 6 hours turns into 6.5 hours, turns into 7 hours, turns into something more. So I would really like to see this defined where exactly what it is of what we're expecting, and allow some teachers to go outside. I know there's certain curriculums that we're going to have here that we need to do that training. This is what we're introducing.
Right.
Everybody's got to be on the same page. But a lot of this, they can go someplace else. Our ag department, when we were at Kerr Elementary, a lot of their staff goes to the national conference. I don't think that should be above and beyond. They're going there and they're specializing in that field. So if you're at the ag school, you probably need some professional development mandatory on ag, where that's probably not necessary at the IB school or something of that nature. So I would just like to see us get more creative. I don't think we need to box teachers into a 40-hour work week on campus, or clocked in, logged in, so forth. 36 hours maybe, and just be creative. We came up with a lot of ideas for classroom. We came up with one idea for the professional development, and I think we can be creative and come up with something that's going to better serve. Professional development is important, but let's get creative. Let's take everything we know and set it aside and come up with something, be trendsetters a little bit on this, and at least look at it and explore if that's a possibility.
So the work days, you're absolutely right. So there's multiple ways that could happen of what happens within the work days versus the blue off days, if you will. And I think there could be some parameters given that, all schools, at least meet this minimal aspect of it. And then where's the flexibility that schools have? Our goal, you just need to know right off the bat, Mrs. Camp and her team work very hard so that we aren't putting the science teacher and the art teacher in ELA training, unless it's their technical part of their standards. But it's very, very differentiated now. And particularly our middle school content area teachers, they choose to do some things together or separate, and there's some choice there. So that's our goal, is to have it be as differentiated as possible. There's times when we don't have access to just the English learner teachers. So we don't have access to do something special just for gifted teachers, and you can just let everybody else be doing, something else, maybe their own individual choice. To your point about if there's a conference that's going to happen on Friday, Saturday, and they're going to go to that instead. Those are things their principals already, can approve for that. So I think what we can do is come back with some examples of maybe what that day could look like. So to just correct anybody, hearing this and thinking that we modeled this with a 40 hours that they would be here at school. The goal and how the committee modeled this was that is an understanding that we're not going to model up to 40 hours. In fact, I believe 14 of those hours 14 of those hours per month of the 40 aren't structured in this. That's really what they're doing on those flexible Fridays. Part of that time would be considered part of the 40 hours, but we really are not. So it's taking away this premise of their working 40 hours, but we held on to modeling it that way, or paying attention to it, so we could make sure we were staying fair, that we weren't, all of a sudden trying to use time where they're working longer days. So we don't want to have that turn against them, where now they're just working more and more. So it's not built on 40 hours. So I'll just say that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Childcare, LEAP, I think no change there. What we did learn from the survey was about 10%, if that holds true across the whole population, 10% more people would be interested in LEAP. Right now we have 40 students on a wait list. In order to open up another school, we'd really have to have about 60 or 80 kids. So you have to have that sweet spot to be able to afford the staffing. And then if you can afford the staffing, you also have to be able to staff it. So overall, these numbers change based on how many sites we have open, how many people participate. This was our best guess. With these, bigger dollar amounts, about 10% more people said they would want it. So we think with that would require us to open up a third site. If we actually got those numbers, but it's going to be something that's going to be very, very fluid that we won't be able to plan for until we know whether this is going to be implemented. Then we'll start to really interact with our parents. Mm-hmm. Anything from any of you on LEAP?
Ms. Bixler, anything on LEAP at all?
No, President Dwyer, I understand what Dr. Stuff is saying. No, I have no questions.
Okay.
I don't know if I hit this right for transportation and food services. I think there were some questions around, so this slide doesn't pertain to anything. I'm just choosing to stop here. There were questions around the idea that if we have support staff losing hours, do we have a way of giving them additional hours to make that up? Because essentially the money would be already budgeted if we weren't trying to get a budget savings. So Mr. Nuttall, I'll just let you talk for a little bit.
Well, sure. Thank you. Or maybe not. Thank you. First and foremost, I just did some quick calculations here. If you go to 7 hours and 40 minutes, as an example, we have reading paraprofessionals and special education paraprofessionals that are currently paid at a 0.9, which is 35 hours a week. So if you just reduce to, and you keep that 0.9, essentially they would be reduced to 28 hours a week if you went to the 0.9 at 7 hours and 30 minutes. But because you went to 7 hours and 40, or that's your recommendation, you then could augment that and make them a 1.0 working 7 hours and 40 minutes. The fact that there's an additional 10 minutes a day is the equivalent of 24 hours over the course of the year at 0.9. So it minimizes the impact just by sheer virtue of the fact that you added the 10 minutes a day. And then the creativity comes in when you make them 1 point from 0.9 to 1.0 as an example. So you really inherently, by adding the 10 days, have closed that gap. Not to a large degree if you go 0.9, but if you were to go 1.0, you would get there, is what I'm suggesting. And those are for campus-specific support staff. So if you have school secretaries and things of that sort, or you have paraprofessionals that service the students, you've increased their service time because you've increased the time that they're working on a particular day. Specific to transportation, you may recall in the initial survey information that I presented in terms of transportation, we have availability to augment hours. There's midday driving opportunities. Currently, as an example, we have our mechanics that are doing runs for parts. Well, it minimizes the amount of time that our mechanics can be doing mechanic work. And if we had a driver go and run parts, we could augment hours, as an example. We also have another possibility, and these things will continue to manifest themselves, but we have a district courier who just resigned their position. And as a result of that, we have to get creative in the interim of not having a courier. But one thought was, if we had 3 drivers that could work 2 additional hours a day, we could still get our courier duties done and augment drivers' hours, even if we went to a 4-hour day, as an example. So there are some creative ways that is certainly possible. The one concern still is out there in terms of food services. With an expanded day to 7 hours and 40 minutes, you likely would expand your lunchtime for a period of time. I don't know if it would be by 10 minutes or 20 minutes. I don't know what that would look like just yet. Probably not. But the food services component is still the one piece. What I will say is that many of our food service workers right now don't work 40 hours a week. They work some of them, many of them work 25 hours a week. So would be possible that they could be close to that in other areas as well. Remember, though, that the food services is self-funded, so they're all contingent upon the revenue that's generated from lunches, and we've talked about that several times. So where we can augment hours for our support staff, we absolutely can and will, and we'll have things that come up that we can get creative with those things and have done so as a recommendation.
I think I would solidify the thought, though, that for some where there's budget associated with it, we could have them work the hours for which we have budget associated. Food services, we would not. So if we're trying to keep any of those people whole, if they worked additional hours, it then becomes a budget item that we'd have to add dollars to our budget for them to keep them whole. So just the thought that we can keep all of our support staff whole with this model is not accurate, and also the consideration with benefits. So as much as possible.
I have a question with food service, and this is maybe way out of the box, but with the longer day, and the kids being here longer, is it possible to help keep them in that we offer some sort of a snack time or something where they could come back through the cafeteria a second time, take a little break, get a healthy snack that food service would be able to manage, and that would give them more time. But we're gonna have some students who are pretty hungry by the end of the day. We have some now when we have, I think, our earliest lunch, more like breakfast at some places. So is that something that can be done where, we do know nutrition is important on their education and their brains. So is there something that we can in that way that would help supplement that?
Mr. Todd, I have Ms. Cabanilla here because I don't want to speak out of turn with all of the regulations for food services. She's memorized all of them, and she can probably suggest that.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we do have something that some of our sites do qualify as far as after-school snacks, but that would be our at high-risk sites. So Rainbow Valley, Freedom, Liberty, and that leaves the remaining of the sites without being able to provide after-school snacks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right.
So have we reached out and had a discussion with support staff about some of these other findings?
We have. We initially provided some of our brainstormed ideas initially in terms of what other opportunities might be presented. I'll speak specifically to transportation and food services. There are some drivers that are not interested in doing anything but driving and made it very, very clear. There are some drivers that said, yes, where there's an opportunity to do things that are related to my job, I will absolutely do that. Most of the folks in transportation have made it really abundantly clear that they want to do the thing that they were hired for, and any of the current options that we've provided, they weren't really all that interested in that. However, when we do things like the courier, that is really related to their work, they're very interested in doing those things to augment. In food services, some of the concern that was brought forward about adding some additional hours, say for cleaning, right? I mean, you can always clean more, you can always clean better, you can always put some things in place. Many of our food service workers have children that attend the schools in our district. And so the reason they work those hours is because they're able to then care for their kids after school, or they couldn't, as an example, work on Friday if needed because their kids would be home without them to be watched over. So I think the in-school support staff, we are able to manipulate some of the things with schedule, with hours, and things like that. If they're operating outside of that, we will still have to get creative in terms of, and they've provided some feedback when we provide those opportunities for them. In most cases, they say, yes, we will. Or in some cases, they say, nope, that's not what I'm doing. I need my midday break. Okay, fair enough.
So that's the concern that I have, is for those individuals who say, yeah, I'm not interested in that. This is why I took this job, so that I could do this and have this time off. Are those folks going to drag up on us?
Maybe.
So that's my concern, is if we have folks doing that, how do we fix that? Because
Well,
we had thrown some ideas of making them whole as far as compensation wise. And now I'm hearing something different, though.
that's just in terms of the work hour. So a certain solution to close the gap in terms of their overall take-home pay, that's certainly an option in terms of augmenting hourly rates of pay to also do that.
Short term, we could increase their wages that offsets, so that's one way. But over time, the way we are funded by the state and that is impacted by our miles driven, which will have been reduced by 20%. So the next year is going to be based on this year's miles. The following year will be based on the miles driven in a 4-day week, which is 20% less. So part of our funding comes from miles driven, and part of it, comes from our other budget. So and also if the state has been talking over time about changing the funding formula, and we'd be much more at risk. We would actually to be benefiting. We would do okay this next year if it stayed the same. But if they change it, as there's been talk to, future-wise, we would have a difficult time sustaining that higher wage for bus drivers if we implemented that. So there's a little more complexity to that one, but there is a way to keep them whole.
So, and I hear you, but I hope that we're hearing them, because without 3 bus drivers, what does that do? That's the reality that we live in, and I appreciate what you said about the state but I try not to put a whole lot of stock in things that they're talking about they're going to do.
I will just say that we've evaluated with our current staffing that there are 6 drivers that at the initial time that we surveyed them and asked them about some additional opportunities that they may have, there were 6 of those drivers that indicated to us that they weren't interested in doing anything extra. That does not mean that they were going to go someplace else for employment. That just means they weren't interested in working extra hours. One of the contingencies that we would have to consider if we didn't have enough drivers would be 2 things. Number one is we may have to look at spreading out our school start times so that drivers may have to do double runs or triple runs. That's one consideration. Another consideration would be to see what the impact of increasing the radius by which students walk to school, which would reduce your routes as an example of the walking distance. And that's not on the sidewalk, by the way, that's as the crow flies. So in many cases, our current 1 mile radius is actually a touch more because they're walking, through neighborhoods and such. So you may have to increase that just as an option. I mean, we'll still work to creatively solve that from the other areas where those aren't impacts, but I'm just opening it up. This is some things that we may have to consider.
Other than instructional and the impact on learning, this is the single most challenge or barrier to implementing the 4-day week is the impact on support staff.
So the one thing that I recognize is that basically, if you will, from a business standpoint, that we're not on the leverage side, that it would be labor who is on the leverage side. And I would be extremely concerned that we would hear them say that they're not interested, but that doesn't mean they're going to leave. To me, what I hear is they're not interested. They just didn't tell us they were going to leave. And so my first thought would be to model an increase in compensation to make them whole. And I would like to see what that looks like for me, because I don't think the impact is very much at all. I think it's just a blip. But if that keeps, if you will, the merry-go-round going and doesn't stop, because if what you talked about happens and then we start messing with the start times, well then that just affects everybody's lives at that point, of parents, support staff, kids, right? That's just my thoughts. I don't know. Ms. Bixler, your thoughts?
I'm encouraged by what Justin has to say about finding ways to at least offer people opportunities to remain whole. And I agree with you, Mark. I think that it maybe not all 6, but maybe at least half of those that did not respond about working more hours may decide not to continue on with our district. We knew going in that the transportation was going to be the hardest one to tackle. My question, Dr. Supp, if we change the salary schedule for transportation, because that's different than, say, our classroom aides, we wouldn't have to look at an adjustment for all of our non-certified staff. Is that correct?
You can do something just for one employee group, but when you look at the overall support staff wage schedule, then what we are compensating our bus drivers then starts to be more than perhaps another position that has more responsibility or more skill. So if I believe that if we are going to utilize the budget savings for support staff, if we utilize that budget savings to either in combination of giving additional hours, making people whole, or maybe it's an and/or, utilizing that budget savings and spreading it across the support staff wage schedule so that it retains that equity for all employees. But to Mr. Aguirre's point, if we can't get them here to school to learn, that's the biggest obstacle we face. The Personnel Association in Arizona found that 26% of all transportation driving positions were unfilled, at the time of that survey in September. We have not faced that. Other districts have faced having to not have routes, have drivers, and tell parents they have to take their children themselves. So you're on to the biggest risk with all of this right now.
Ms. Bixler, sorry, Mr. Todd. Ms. Bixler, I would just add one thing in terms of the overall support staff wage schedule. I think a combination of both is possible. And what I mean by that is, there are other ways that you can increase bus driver pay. We've conducted study after study. There are many school districts that just priced us out of the market with bus drivers. But that's not the norm. So, there are districts around that when they had a shortage, they completely priced us out. We could not possibly match. So I think firmly, philosophically, we believe that if there's an increase of some kind, it should go to maintain the increase across the support staff wage schedule. We've worked really hard to avoid this or get rid of this compression component as a result of the minimum wage requirement. And that's been really, really successful. So the combination could be sprinkle a little bit for everybody, add a little bit more for drivers to match somewhat where we've already been priced out of the market. The other example I'll just mention here that is worth considering as a result of the survey information. We currently have policy in place that says you're required to work 30 hours a week to receive benefit, to be benefit eligible. So we can get many of our drivers there or close to that 30, but it is a consideration that needs to be considered by the board in terms of, are we going to reduce that requirement in hours, which, it is a cost. The district incurs about $8,000 per employee right now for benefits. So it's just something also to consider. And that is a reason as well that somebody might not return. They may not care about the hours. They may care about the benefits coverage. And we know who those people are. I'm not going to suggest a number right now. That's not fair to them. But if they had to reduce to 26 hours a week and we didn't provide them benefits, I think many of our drivers really rely upon that. So just another consideration.
Mr. Todd,
Thank you for bringing that up, Justin. I
Ms.
did consider
Bixler?
that, and I neglected to mention it. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
So I'm glad you went first. My thought behind and what I was going to say is, I don't think all jobs are necessarily created equal. And to your point, we've been priced out of the market with bus drivers right now. We're short. Probably gonna have a bigger shortage if we've been priced out of the market. So we may have to pay certain areas more. You see now in hospitals, a nurse, they're so short on nurses, there's a $10,000 signing bonus to come on at this place. And you see nurses who are leaving, they live out there a year or 2 years, they're on to the next one. I don't want to get into that cycle, but the doctors who actually are more skilled than the nurses aren't getting that bonus because they've got doctors right now. It's a supply and demand issue. So I think we're right. Yeah, well, we all agree. We should just let you say it. But that's just a hard reality that if bus drivers are our Achilles heel, which could be, and I mean that in a positive manner, to Dr. Shuff's point, we got to get the kids to school. Doesn't matter how good we educate them if we can't get them here. Then we have to go out and pay them more. Exactly what we're doing here with the 4-day work week. We're trying to find ways to attract high quality, the very best, the tens, if you will, in every class. We want the best mechanic, we want the best teacher, we want the best maintenance staff. We want everything to be the best. So I don't foresee that being a problem to differentiate that. In a few years, it may be, special ed, I think we're pretty short on right now. We may have to come up with something creative for special ed teachers, but not everything's the same. And there's a lot of people who have a master's degree, and let's just be honest, a master's degree in teaching doesn't bring you near the pay that a master's degree maybe in business does. It doesn't seem fair. But those are the realities, and bringing forth increased pay to me, not only do we need bus drivers, we need the best. We need safe. We all drive on that road. We know what it's like. So I don't think that's a problem to adjust that.
I'll just suggest also, two things in response to that. So absolutely, our drivers are well trained. We are short in terms of future casting, right? Because of our growth, we just had to add some routes, right? And that creates a somewhat of a shortage. We haven't missed one route. Our kids have had every opportunity to ride a bus every single possible day. We have not missed a route. And that's kudos to Dondi and her staff and her team and her contingency plans that she consistently employs. Is that sustainable? With our growth, I mean, we have bus driver positions open all the time. We never not consider it because we know that we're growing. But we haven't missed one. We have not missed one route for our students in this district through the pandemic, through last year, through shortages, through shortfalls. And I just wanted to publicly compliment them for that because they have done an amazing job at that.
I hear you, and that's critical for us. But as we look at contingencies, they're great, but we don't want those to ever become the norm. And right now we're in some of our darkest times, so there's all sorts of contingencies. But to increase pay of bus drivers, that just to me seems like that's.
I think that helps us in not having to use the contingencies on a daily basis in survival mode. I think understood.
Our contingencies are normal, and now we have no contingency because it becomes normal. So we're going to have to pay the bus drivers more money.
Mr. Parks, your thoughts?
Actually, you guys pretty well covered what I was going to say because I had even written down supply and demand. I mean, it's one of those things you got to pay what you got to pay, and I know it's hard. And one of the things I was going to add into that, and it's been my business experience, anytime you change somebody's compensation or anything you're providing for them, in addition, you lose half your staff, and you can augment that as much as you can to try to prevent it, but keep in mind any changes is going to cause people to leave. So just in preparation, we can do everything we can. We're going to lose people, but we have to be prepared, and I think we're in consensus here, to be able to offer something to the to potential employees that will give us an advantage.
Just so you know, we're scheduling a CDL training before Monday's board meeting for anybody that's interested.
I already have one.
I think all principals would be great. We can get all principals on board.
And obviously, some thoughts could be part of that that additional compensation is in that. I'm just using a round figure here. 25 hours. It only takes 25 hours for that particular work group to maintain benefits, which we can affect benefit cost off of a healthier work group. So just something to think about also. Dr. Schaff.
I think unless staff, if I've missed something, I think we've hit the new pieces and the questions you have. We can revisit anything else.
Mr. Todd?
Or anything new?
Did you have additional questions?
I think we got them all covered. I'm going back looking, but I think, I think we have everything.
Mr. Parks?
Yeah, I think we covered everything I needed to.
Ms. Bixler?
Yes, I agree with Ms. Parks and Ms. Todd. All my questions have been answered.
Is there anything else for the decision on the 14th that you need us to prepare or bring back to be ready?
Just what we talked about with our special needs and I think it was possibly looked at of the extended school year. Of what I'm saying is that can be an option if it's indeed needed. How that happens, that's you guys make that happen, right? But that can be an option to ease stress levels of our parents.
So if it's discussed, is what you're in, it's in the implementation of it.
Correct. Okay. Correct.
right, so it doesn't sound like something else to prepare, but just an understanding that that's how that would come out. Okay.
One thing I guess you're probably on it, but a good communications plan that starts letting people know Luke's been asking for more work, so they'll help him out. Just really detailed, so everybody knows. We kind of calm the fears. Maybe even target all of our IEP students with a separate information packet than everybody else, so that they know if we go this way.
Okay.
We usually communicate with them about the extended school year, so that would be easy to do. We could actually put it out there for more students than we do if they qualify for ESY, but we can do a whole different route, and
And that's right there is what I'm talking about. Of if they qualify for ESY, that hey, this is an option to combat this, right?
and
I think that helps people.
and the IEP teams may decide that because of those days, those missing days, more kids could qualify for ESY, and then we could add it.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else? No? Ms. Bixler, anything?
No, President Aguirre, I have nothing to add.
So I might get in trouble, but I'm okay with that. So tomorrow is Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to everyone. Service members, if you're out there in TV land, anyone here in the room with us, thank you very much for your service. I'd also like to recommend there's a Veterans Day parade tomorrow, downtown Phoenix. It's a very wonderful experience. So I'd encourage everyone, if you can, to go. So it starts at 11. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second?
So I have a motion and a second. All together, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Show that we adjourned at 5:01.
Have a nice.